Will not the knowledge I am Brahman, which arises in the Jiva and is different from Brahman, be false?
As the immutable self implied in the term I is always one with Brahman, like the pot space and infinite space, it is completely identical with it. As for the Jiva implied in the term I, it can have identity with Brahman by removal of obstruction through negating the idea of Jiva, just as on seeing a post in a dim light, one imagines it to be a man, the man becomes one with the post on the negation of the idea of its being a man when it is discovered to be only a post.
Do the reflected consciousness and the immutable, which are implied in the term I exist at the same time? Or do they appear at different times?
They appear at the same time. The reflected consciousness is the object of the witness, but the witness is self-cognized. When there is actual knowledge of pots and other external objects, what happens is this: the concept part in the perception of the inner organ accompanied by the reflected consciousness goes out as far as the pots and other objects and assumes their forms and removes the obstruction which naturally covers them on account of ignorance. Just as a non-luminous object covered by a pot will not be seen with the help of a lamp, even so the reflected part illuminates the objects. When there is direct realization of Brahman, which is the Self, what happens is this: the inner organ, with the help of the sound produced by the important scriptural saying that thou art, when connected with the ear, takes the form of Brahman and loses contact with the senses. This is like the knowledge of the 10th man which arises through the sound produced by the sentence, "You are the 10th man," or like the ideas of joy and sorrow which arise without any external objects. This concept of the form of Brahman removes the obstruction hiding the self, and then the slight ignorance which still persists in the inner organ disappears like the dart which is removed by soap. Thereafter Brahman becomes manifest by its own effulgence, like the light of the glorious sun which shines when slight obstructions, like when fingers held over one's eyes are removed. Just as a lamp kept in a pot shines without the aid of another light, when the pot is broken, Brahman too does not require the help of the reflected consciousness.
What are the chief and secondary means of attaining this knowledge?
Ritualistic sacrifices and similar acts and meditation performed without motive are the secondary means. The four qualifications like discrimination, the three steps and inquiry into the meaning of that and thou, these 8 make up the chief means.
If knowledge arises through the saying alone, where is the need for hearing, etc.?
Knowledge is of two kinds, namely steady and unsteady. Although an inferior aspirant who has doubts and false notions may have direct knowledge through the teaching of the saying, it will not produce the proper effect, it is defective. By constant practice of hearing, etc., the defect will be removed. This is the aim of hearing, etc. In the case of a superior aspirant whose inner organ is extremely pure and free from the doubts and false notions, so that steady direct knowledge will arise by merely hearing the saying, it is not necessary to have hearing, etc., for removing the defects. He alone is liberated while alive, whose wisdom is firm.
What are the distinguishing marks of the sage and the ignorant person?
The ignorant person is distinguished by his attachment, the sage by dispassion. Even if the ignorant person occasionally develops dispassion, it is likely to change since he has not got rid of the sense of reality in the objects of the senses. His dispassion is superficial. On the other hand, the dispassion of the sage, which has developed out of his sense of the unreality of objects of the senses, does not change at any time and is therefore intense.
Why do some persons say that ritualistic acts accompanied by meditation and knowledge are the cause of steadiness?
The idea that the self, which is separate from the body, is the doer and enjoyer, and the idea that the doer, the act, and its result are different from one another are the cause of ritualistic acts. The result is impermanent samsara. The self is of the nature of the unattached Brahman, the doer, the act, and the result are not distinct from the self. To know this is knowledge, and its fruit is eternal liberation. So how can these two coexist?
So long as the inner organ exists, its natural quality of unsteadiness will not leave even the sage. Therefore, if it is not an obstacle to liberation after death, how can there be the experience of bliss of liberation while alive? Is it not necessary for even the sage to meditate in order to remove the unsteadiness of the mind?
Since samadhi and distraction are the same to a sage of steadfast wisdom, he does not enter into any action for the sake of steadiness of mind. For him there is no nescience as a cause of his activity, nor any delusion of difference as a result of nescience, nor attachment and hatred resulting from the delusion of difference. Only prarabdha remains, this is the cause of his activity. And that being different from person to person, there is no fixity in regard to the activity arising out of prarabdha. Hence the sage's activity and inactivity are governed by prarabdha. Therefore there can be a desire for sense enjoyment and efforts to attain it, as in the case of Janka and others, on account of the prarabdha responsible for enjoyment. Similarly, there can be the desire for liberation while alive and disgust with sense enjoyment, as in the case of Sukha, Vamdeva and others, on account of the prarabdha responsible for inactivity. The bliss of Brahman will not become manifest owing to the mere immobility of the inner organ. It will become manifest only through the concept of the form of Brahman. Since this will arise only through reflection on the meaning of the Vedanta, and since unsteadiness will disappear even through this, one who desires to have the bliss of liberation while alive has to reflect on the meaning of Vedanta texts only and need not meditate.
Can the sage have too much activity?
When activity is excessive, happiness will decrease. When activity is less, the happiness will be more. But knowledge remains the same. Although activity is inimical to that happiness, which is distinct from liberation while alive, it is not inimical to liberation while alive, since there is no delusion of bondage by activity and inactivity so far as the self is concerned.
Since the sage cannot have attachment on account of his seeing all objects as non-self, unreal and evil, what can motivate his activity?
Although he knows the body to be unreal, the sage may be active on account of his prarabdha, For instance, he may go begging, etc., to maintain the body on account of his prarabdha. It is like people watching a conjuring act even when they know how it is done, or like an invalid doing things that are bad for him even though he knows that they are.
What is the meaning of saying that the sage has no desires?
It is not that his inner organ will not take the form of desires. As the inner organ is not the product of pure sattva alone, but of the less prominent rajas and tamas, in combination with the prominent sattva, all the qualities will more or less exist in it. Therefore, so long as the inner organ remains there, will not be the entire absence of desires which are modifications of rajas. But the sage does not mistake the desires for characteristics of the self. That is the difference. He is unattached. Though he acts, he is a non-doer. That is why the scripture says that the good and bad acts done by the body and the merit and demerit after attaining knowledge do not affect him.
Is it not necessary for the sage to enter into blissful and non-dual nirvikalpa samadhi in which concepts are all absorbed in nescience, as in deep sleep, and there is no experience of nescience-covered bliss, and the concept of the inner organs in the form of Brahman is absorbed in the effulgence of Brahman? Won't one who, while alive, gives up the bliss of liberation to enjoy sense pleasures, give up liberation after death for the desire to attain heavenly worlds?
The rejection of the bliss of liberation while alive and the desire for worldly enjoyments may happen in the case of a sage on account of his prarabdha, but they will not happen after his nescience is burnt up by his knowledge. Therefore his life force will not go out, and he cannot become embodied again either in this world or any other on account of prarabdha. Hence the rejection of liberation after death and desire for, or attainment of, other worlds is not possible for the sage.
What is liberation while alive? And what is liberation after death?
The absence of the delusion of bondage even while one is embodied is liberation while alive. The absorption of the gross and subtle nescience in consciousness after the experience of prarabdha is liberation after death. This is the gist of the important scriptural texts.